The narrative begins with a lady recounting her people's history on Arrakis, a desert planet. Chani, the woman, is a Fremen. She adds that the planet has been dominated by the wicked Harkonnens since before she was born, and they have become extremely wealthy by harvesting the psychogenic drug melange, commonly known as the spice. The Fremen have tried and failed to eject the Harkonnens. However, Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV just ordered the Harkonnens to depart Arrakis. Chani wonders who will be the future overlords. Paul Atreides had breakfast with his mother, Lady Jessica, Duke Leto's concubine, on the planet Caladan. Jessica, a member of the quasi-religious order of the Bene Gesserit, has been attempting to teach her son about her group's particular abilities. She puts Paul to the test by forcing her to pass him a drink of water. Paul's success is merely partial. Paul discovers the planet Arrakis and its inhabitants. It is the only source of the psychoactive spice that increases longevity and perception. Spice is required for interstellar travel because it allows navigators with enlarged awareness to organize faster than light leaps, folding space-time to go immediately from one planet to another. Leto Atreides, together with soldiers Gurney Halleck and Mentat Thufirhawat, welcome an Imperial envoy who formalizes House Atreides' acquisition of Arrakis. The Emperor is concerned about Leto's rising political strength and popularity in the Landsraad, a noble house conclave. Leto understands that his assignment to supervise Arrakis is a trap of some sort, yet he cannot refuse an Imperial offer. Paul begs his pal, the elite soldier Duncan Idaho, to accompany him to Arrakis weeks in advance to spy things out. Duncan is adamantly opposed. Paul admits to experiencing visions about Arrakis and the Fremen, including one in which Duncan is killed in combat. Duncan dismisses it as a nightmare, telling Paul, "Everything significant happens while we're awake." Paul discusses with his father his desire to fly to Arrakis early, but Leto refuses, stating that he needs Paul at his side. He explains the political situation. The Emperor has instigated a fight between House Atreides and House Harkonnen, a war that would weaken both, to the Emperor's advantage. Leto, on the other hand, plans to form an alliance with the Fremen in order to harness their desert might and deceive the Emperor. Paul reveals his reservations about succeeding his father as a leader. Leto admits to having misgivings when he was younger and assures that Paul, like him, would find his way to leadership. Gurney spars with Paul, suggesting that the young ducal heir be more cautious of the Harkonnens' threat and more brutal in combat. Paul starts having nightmares about Chani, Reverend Mother Gaia's Helen Mohiam, Jessica's Bene Gesserit superior, comes on Caladan to put Paul to the test. He is examined by Suck Dr. Wellington Nue before the meeting, who tells Paul that the Bene Gesserit have their own purpose. Mohiam puts Paul through the Gumjabar exam, judging his character with a poisoned needle and a pain-inflicting box. Mohiam questions Paul after the test about his dreams and whether they occasionally come true. Mohiam then chastises Jessica for having a male for Duke Leto rather than the daughters she was supposed to have. Jessica is accused of believing that her kid is the Kwisatz Haderach, the fulfillment of a Bene Gesserit messianic prophecy. Jessica affirms this notion, and Mohiam cautions her that Paul's powers are not completely matured, and he may perish in the upcoming trials. Paul confronts his mother about what Mohiam meant after he left. Jessica reveals that the Bene Gesserit have spent hundreds of years engaged in a selective breeding program to create an unrivaled intellect capable of seeing both the past and the future. Arrakis is visited by the Atreides. Locals start shouting a slogan Paul doesn't know as they depart their ship. When Paul inquires about it, his mother reveals that it is a local prophecy of the Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from the outer world, a promised messiah on Arrakis. Jessica believes Paul is this person, but Paul rejects it as mere superstition disseminated by the Bene Gesserit. Shadout Mapes, a Fremen servant, is hired by Jessica. Mapes views Jessica and Paul as the fulfillment of the Lisan al-Gaib and offers Jessica a knife crafted from the teeth of Shai-Hulud, the enormous sandworms that make Arrakis desert so treacherous. Paul survives an assassination attempt by a hunter-seeker drone that night while studying a hologram image of the Muad'Dib desert mouse when Mapes enters the room, diverting it. Leto takes a look around his new realm and sees that the Harkonnens have ruined most of the necessary infrastructure. They decide to take the matter to the imperial arbiter of the changeover, Light Kynes, an ecological who has lived on Arrakis for years. Duncan Idaho has returned from spending several weeks with the Fremen. He informs the Duke that the Fremen are unrivaled combatants who live in tunnels under the desert in towns known as Sciaches. Thufir Hawat's conviction that there are far more Fremen than originally thought is confirmed by Duncan. Stilgar, the leader of one of these Sciaches, has arrived to speak with Leto. Stilgar orders that the Outworlders only leave the city to mine spices. Leto declines but swears that the Sciaches will be safe and that Fremen will not be persecuted as long as the Atreides are in power. Stilgar is invited to remain, but he declines. Duncan shows the Atreides various Fremen technology, such as moisture-saving stillsuits and thumpers used to attract sandworms. To examine the spice mining activities, Leto's party meets with Light Kynes. She examines their stillsuits, discovering that Paul had intuitively fitted his stillsuit in the Fremen style. He shall know your ways as though born to them, she adds in her home tongue. The group takes off on a plane to inspect a spice mining operation. The mining vehicle, known as a sand crawler, has lured a worm, which is pulled by the crawler's rhythmic vibrations as it gathers the spice. Duke Leto lands his tiny squad of ornithopters nearby to rescue the miners when a flying carry-all fails to retrieve the mining truck. When Paul comes out to help the miners inside, he is hit with a tremendous amount of spice and has a series of visions, one of which is of himself with Chani. When Gurney grabs him and hauls him on board his father's ornithopter, he is nearly pulled down into the sand by the crawler. The two stand there watching as the worm's massive, toothed jaw opens and consumes the sand crawler completely. Dr. Ul later examines Paul and advises him and his mother that the spice is psychotropic but will not damage Paul. Duke Leto wakes up in the middle of the night with the feeling that something is awry. He dials security but receives no response. He discovers Mapes has been stabbed to death and is blasted with a paralytic dart that burrows through his body shield and into his back, paralyzing him. Yua admits to being a traitor. He has lowered the shields and cut off communication with Atreides. As the Harkonnen soldiers, supported by Imperial Sardaukar men, launch their assault, Gurney awakens and leads the counterattack. The Atreides forces caught off guard and outnumbered by Harkonnen and Sardaukar troops, are rapidly overwhelmed. Duncan kills numerous Sardaukar, steals an ornithopter, and attempts to rescue Paul and Jessica, only to discover them gone. Baron Vladimir Harkonnen had told the Bene Gesserit that he would not kill Paul or Jessica, so he sends several of his soldiers to capture them and abandon them to die of exposure in the desert. Paul, despite his lack of confidence in his Bene Gesserit talents, is able to use the voice to command one of the men to remove his mother's gag. Jessica instantly instructs one of the men to murder his fellow soldier. When she is finally liberated, she personally murders two of them. Their ornithopter crashes and Paul and Jessica witness Rakin's destruction from afar. Yua tells Leto that the Harkonnens obtained his cooperation by holding his wife hostage. He replaces one of Duke Leto's teeth with a poison capsule, hoping the Duke will use it to assassinate the Baron. Yua meets with Baron Harkonnen and asks that he keep his half of the bargain. The Baron tells Yua that he will be reunited with his wife before slitting his neck. The Baron then gloats over an immobilized Leto, who bites down on his false tooth and expels the poison, killing everyone save the Baron, who is seriously hurt. The Baron is being nursed back to health by medical personnel. Paul continues to get visions from his spice exposure while riding out a storm in a survival tent. They are Chani's first. They swiftly shift to images of brutal battle and religious zealots acting under the Atreides banner and in the name of Duke Leto, spreading over the galaxy like an insatiable fire. Paul is appalled by what he saw and blames his mother and the Bene Gesserit, but his mother finally consoles him. Duncan Idaho, who managed to escape the bloodbath, saves Paul and Jessica. Duncan transports them to Kynes, who has established himself in an abandoned terraforming station manned by Fremen. The Sardaukar pursue them and assault, with the Fremen slaughtering several of them. Duncan makes the ultimate sacrifice in order for Paul, Jessica, and Kynes to escape. Paul and Jessica take to the skies in an ornithopter. Kynes rigs up with Thumper with the intention of summoning a sandworm and riding it away, but she is fatally wounded by the Sardaukar. A sandworm appears before they can execute the deadly blow. and Kynes invites it to her by beating a piece of drums, and Paul gets a vision of a Fremen man offering him guidance while piloting the ornithopter during a violent sandstorm, advising him that surviving in the desert is a process and that he must go with the flow of the environment. Paul retracts the thopter's wings, allowing the storm vortex to carry them farther into the desert. They escape the sandstorm, but because the ornithopter is destroyed, they must go through the desert on foot. Fremen are watching them as they go. Jessica and Paul proceed to the location where they believe the Fremen Science is. Their motions attract a sandworm, who flees for some nearby rocks. The sandworm appears to glance at Paul for a few seconds before being drawn away by a thumper. They are apprehended by a group of Fremen. Stilgar joins them and recognizes Paul, telling them that they cannot touch him. Jammies, another Fremen, rejects Stilgar's ideology and wishes to murder Paul and Jessica and steal their bodies. Jammies is recognized by Paul as the guy from his dreams. Jessica requests assistance in returning to Caladan, stating that they would be highly rewarded, but Stilgar rejects any payment as meaningless. Stilgar agrees to let Paul, who is still young, join their Science, but Jessica, whom he believes is too old to fight, must be left behind. Jessica and Paul utilize their Bene Gesserit skills to disarm the majority of the Fremen and threaten Stilgar with a knife. Stilgar relents when he realizes Jessica is a Bene Gesserit and decides to take both of them to the Science. Jammies opposes, and Jessica is challenged to a duel. Paul promises to represent Jessica as her champion. Chani, a member of the party, feels sorry for Paul, whom she worries will die at the hands of Jamie, and offers him her Christ knife, a dagger crafted from a sandworm's teeth, a moment from one of Paul's dreams. Paul outclasses Jammies in the duel, repeatedly placing a knife to his throat and demanding that he submit. Stilgar warns him that Fremen duels are death matches, and Jessica claims that Paul has never murdered anybody. Paul murders Jammies reluctantly. The Fremen return Paul and Jessica to their Science. Satisfied, Paul and Jessica witness a Fremen riding a live worm. Chani warns Paul as they begin their trip into the desert, this is merely the beginning. If you loved the narrative, keep hitting the subscribe button and we'll meet with another wonderful notion. And there I go, bye bye ShowsWeb fans. And yes, I will persist to dig deep into your hearts.